Hello, and welcome to Using Scrum to Promote SEL during project-based learning experiences. My name is Katie. I'm a high school science teacher at Nevada High School, and I've been teaching for about 10 years. I believe deeply in the power of critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, engaging students in real-world learning, and preparing them as global citizens. One way that I have found really powerful to do that is through project-based learning. And one question I continually found around project-based learning is how do I make the projects more manageable for students and ensure that all students are equally engaging or getting the most out of the experience. Other things about me: I'm a mother of 3, I'm a wife, and I like to make things pretty. So when I was thinking about how do I improve my project-based learning experiences, I stumbled upon Scrum. So let me tell you a little bit about Scrum. And actually, I'm just going to let someone else tell you about Scrum because they're better at it than I am. Here we go. Here's a short video I shared with my students. The YouTube link is here in case you want to use it in your classroom as well.
Complex projects can lead to real headaches. Organizing the team, changes in scope, roles that aren't clear. But you can change that with Scrum, an agile framework. At its foundation, Scrum can be applied to any project or product development effort. Here's how it works. A product owner creates the product backlog, a prioritized wish list. During sprint planning, the team pulls a chunk from the top of that list and decides how to complete it. The team has a set time frame, the sprint, to complete their work. They meet in a daily scrum to keep the work moving forward. Along the way, the Scrum Master keeps the team focused. At the end of the sprint, the work should be potentially shippable. The team conducts a sprint review on the product and a retrospective on the process. Then, they choose the next chunk of the backlog, and the cycle repeats. With Scrum, you can ensure the most valuable work has been completed by the time the project ends. Tackle your projects with Scrum.
So how in the world does that fit into the educational setting? Well, that's what brings
Complex
us
projects
to
can lead to
EduScrum. And it's kind of taking this industry standard of Scrum, which is used heavily in engineering, and making it work in the educational setting. It's thinking about how can we engage students in planning and having them thinking about what they're doing, what needs to be in a backlog, what do they need to tackle now, who can they assign tasks, how do they hold each other accountable, how do they think about their processes, what are they creating. That entire process is Scrum, and how do they organize for that, set goals. All of that jazz is embodied in Scrum. So when I introduced this project, these are the very slides that I introduced with my students. And I talked to them about, we're going to go through this planning process. We're actually going to engage in work cycles. I am going to be your project manager. I'm going to introduce you to the project. I'm going to tell you what I would like you guys to create. From that, you guys are going to create these things called user stories, in which you identify what you need to create based on what I would like as a project owner. And then you will create a backlog of things that need to be done in order for you to complete the user stories and the tasks set up by the product manager. So let's get into some of that vocabulary. I introduce students to Scrum, which is a process of agile thinking that allows teams to be more flexible in their engineering design. Keep in mind that, of course, I'm doing this with my science students, and I'm engaging them in this engineering process. I told them about the product owner, which was myself in this case, but it's the person commissioning the project. User stories are the intended outcome, and here in a second, I'm going to show you guys the Scrum board that I used with my students. The backlog is the list of what you have to do to get to the user story. This is not our social contract. This is an agreement of how we're going to treat each other, but this is actually what can be assigned and completed. The backlog was something that I was noticing students were getting confused because they were like, oh, we all need to agree to be kind to each other. And I was like, no, that's lovely. And that is our social emotional goals. That is not our backlog. Our backlog is what we need to get done. Okay, so this is a living document of everything that we're going to complete. Our Scrum Board is where we house our doing, done, and in process or upcoming things. Stand-ups are daily meetings. I'll help you guys see how I organize those stand-ups that students did do every day to help them organize as teams. And retrospectives were the process of reflecting on how did they do as a team to organize as a group. So when I organized for my project, students were doing the classic Rube Goldberg project to show an understanding of force, motion, acceleration, energy, engineering design, the whole shebang. We're kind of getting through most of our physics standards, and this was an application of all of it wrapped into one entire project. So I created for students a group folder, and they were allowed to choose one other person that they really wanted to work with. And then I put together the groups based on what I knew about the class, because this was the end of the semester project. And then I put together group folders with all of these materials in the group folder. So inside the group folder, each team had a Scrum Board, which I'll highlight for you. And then each person was also assigned a social emotional learning goal. So these social emotional learning goals were aligned to different aspects of social emotional learning, like relationship skills, responsible decision making, self-management, and social awareness. And the students really needed to assign those goals, which had different tasks, especially in stand-ups, to different people in their group, and then reflect on those at the end of the day. Students at the end of this would turn in this folder as part of their evidence for completing the user stories as part of the project. So let me show you the Scrum Board to give context to how we engaged in the Scrum process in our project-based learning, along with some social emotional learning. The first thing I did was introduce students to the project. The project owner was myself, Mrs. Borton. Our product was the Rube Goldberg project-based learning, and we had 5 major user stories. Our first user story was that students were going to create a Rube Goldberg machine made of over 50% recycled materials that uses simple machines and mechanism changes more than 5. They needed to create a YouTube video of a successful single-take Rube Goldberg machine. They also needed to create a machine presentation which include a diagram of an entire machine, at least 6 examples of Newton's laws identified and explained. It had at least 6 examples of energy transfer and energy forms identified and explained. It had to have 2 free body diagrams of point in time in your machine, a written paragraph highlighting and explaining where changes in velocity and acceleration occur in your machine. They also had to turn in those SEL learning logs and their Scrum Board. Here is an example of the backlog, and I went ahead and added some tasks for them. So a way that a backlog is filled out is that you take your user story and you just start brainstorming everything that you are going to need to do to complete this user story. So I filled in some things for them, and students were continually adding to the backlog. And sometimes to start class, I would actually tell students things that they needed to add to their backlog, and I'll show you later what that looked like. So here was the backlogs that I provided for students for each user story. And then I helped students organize by color coding each person according to a tab, so that when they got to their Scrum boards, I was able to quickly see that Johnny was blue, Megan was orange, Alejandra was green, Alex was purple, and the entire team was red. And so I could see what was assigned to each individual person who was making progress on their Scrum boards and who might need a little extra support from me. Students would put the things that they knew were going to be coming up in their projects on their to-do, and they would type in the different things that they knew were coming into the to-do area and then color code it according to the different people. Once it was in process, they would move those tabs to in process and assign them to the individuals who were working on them. And once it was done, they would move it to done. So this is the Scrum Board. A typical Scrum Board has the to do, in process, and done. As I explained to students, at the end of the project, you would expect to see all of the tabs moved to done, and it would be a log of everything that each individual person had successfully completed along the process of the project. Taking a quick look at the SEL Roles book, this is the Relationship Skills Manager. It just gives directions on what I wanted them to do. So each day there was a couple prompts. The prompts were the same every day. They needed to identify a goal and something that they did well with their group. So here is some common indicators of relationship skills, and then just some things that their group did. We communicated well when we did this. We ensured that everyone felt like a valued member when we did this. And one way that we showed that we were a team member was when we did this. And sometimes students couldn't fill out all of these things. Sometimes it just was not a good day for their team, and that made for really good conversations in their stand-ups because they realized, you know what, as I was filling out my reflection on our relationship skills, I had a really hard time thinking about how we were really valuing everyone. So I think we should make a goal around that. And so again, I'll show you here in a second how we got to those goals. Let's talk about stand-up meetings. So every day, students had a 5 to 7 minute meeting where they were actually required to stand up. They did not love that. And talk about a few things. And it was all organized around their roles. So the Scrum Master was actually the responsible decision-making person. They had the Scrum Board out. They updated the Scrum Board. They talked about the individual goals. The Social Awareness person actually had people identify a social emotional goal for the day. This is where they thought about, what did we do well yesterday? What do we need to do as a group? How do we need to treat each other? Do we need to focus on analyzing better? Do we need to focus on communicating better? All of those things. Relationship skills actually focused on how can we connect today? So it could be having a conversation. What's your favorite thing to eat? How can we get to know each other better as a team? And self-management was actually the person who was checking in on each individual person. Okay, could you update me again? What did you get done yesterday? So the self-management person and the Scrum Master really worked in unison together. And each one of our stand-ups worked together each day. They completed that every day, whether they had a lot to do or not. This is what a slide would look like when I wanted them to update their backlog. So I would throw this up to start the class, and I'd say, here's some things that I want you guys to add to your backlog. I just need you to be aware. Here's some things that you might want to add. And I would do this with some upcoming deadlines. Again, as the project manager, I was giving them a heads up. Here's some things that are coming up for you that I want you to be aware of. And as the time went on, obviously I had to remind them less and less of the expectations of their roles and more about upcoming deadlines. And this is actually the last stand-up meeting slide right here for our final project. And it was just a checklist. Here's everything that I'm going to need from you. Here's our checklist. Make sure you've got everything for me. When I asked students how they felt about the process, they gave me some awesome feedback. I wish that I could share it all with you. You can go ahead and pause this video to read a few quotes that I quick grabbed from students. But overwhelmingly, students were positive about the Scrum and social emotional learning tie-in because they felt like it made them more successful working as a team. They loved being able to set goals and really talk through how they worked as a team and what they needed to get done. So I want to thank you so much for coming to my video. I'd love to share more. There is stuff on my website about this. If you want to check that out at bortonscience.com, you can reach out to me via email at katherineborton@gmail.com, and there are my socials. Thank you for coming.